of the decision making to move it to fully online. There was anticipated heavy snow, and that was a decision that we'd taken, that it would be, rather than put people at risk of travelling. Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, Convener. Just, we usually get a winter plan. I didn't seem to have had it this year. Is that something that Malcolm can?
Okay, I'll leave that with Mr. Benny to look into, and perhaps we could maybe get something circulated to members just around what the winter plan is and the preparations for adverse weather. Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Moody, do we have any apologies?
There are no apologies, Convener. All members are present.
Okay, thank you. Is there any member that has a declaration of interest, financial or non-financial, in relation to this morning's agenda? No, nothing indicated. We will move to the minutes. We have 2 minutes. The minute of the meeting of executive held on the 28th of November. First, are we happy to agree that as a true record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
And the minute of the special meeting of the executive, which was held on the 7th of December.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, thank you for that, colleagues. Moving on to the rolling action log, pages 22 to 25. Oh, sorry, Councillor Nimmo.
It's okay, Convener. Usually Colin comes in first. I was a bit quick putting my hand up there.
Okay, right. I was just going to turn to Mr. Moody. It was in case I didn't give you a chance for the last item. Okay, rolling action log, Mr. Moody.
Yes, thank you, Convener. And as usual, the rolling action log simply records the outstanding items where the executive or another body has requested a report for the executive. The information, I think, is complete, and there are comments available in the comments column just to explain if any aren't anticipated by their anticipated reporting date, but it is available for members to ask questions.
Thank you. I'll now come to you, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks very much, Convener. It's a question in relation to item 639. That's on page 24 of the papers. I'm just wondering when we can expect a report coming back from our new Equalities and Human Rights officer who took up post back in November.
Colin?
I think Karen's going to come in on this point, Convener.
Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. So, as you say, Councillor Nimmo, our new Equalities Officer started 27th of November. Obviously there's a settling in period to understand the work that's required of the Council, but one of the first things on the officer's work plan is a review of our equality impact assessments. There's a piece of work that would get done around benchmarking and looking at good practice as much as it is about reviewing what we do. So I don't have a date for that, but it is one of the first things on their action plan. I think it is worth saying, though, that the decision of members to include care experience on the EPIA has already been done. So that is in place, and it's just a second part that we need to add to the equality impact assessment, but it's part of that wider review to ensure that we've got the best practice in there when we do that. Thanks.
Thanks for the update, Karen. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions in relation to the rolling action log? And apologies, Karen, I'm just getting used to going back to doing this all online and catching folks. Okay, move on to our agenda proper and the item 6. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. We have motions. Forgot it wasn't full council. We usually take the motions at the end, but we have 2 motions that stand referred to the executive. And the first motion is motion 5, which is permitted development procedures, and it was submitted by Councillor McCabe. So we have Councillor McCabe who is with us today to speak to the motion, and then we will move to someone to formally move it. Councillor McCabe.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Convener. Good morning, everyone. I wasn't sure what the process was, whether it would be proposed at first and then I would speak, but happy to fall in with the procedures you've just outlined, Convener. Permitted development rights. As you know, it was tabled for full council, but then it was referred to the executive. Permitted development rights have always existed within the myriad miles of planning bureaucracy. The idea of simple development planning rights is all very laudable and you'd think would be supported by planners, developers, neighbours and constituents alike. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Permitted development rights were seen as part of a process where the need for development permissions could be simplified and so assist members of the public with an easier and faster method to gain any statutory approvals. Due to significant pressures on planning department resources throughout the country, permitted development rights have been regularly updated and revised in an effort to improve and simplify the whole planning submission experience. Instead, what's actually happened is an erosion of development control and a muddying of the whole process's rules, regulations, interpretations and application. My concern is that it also leads to abuses of the system at various stages. I have a number of examples of applications which include planning applications, permitted development submissions, householder permitted development rights applications, etc., which all have various details within them which attracted my initial attention and have subsequently highlighted apparent problems within each of them and so supported my initial concerns. P220386 CPL and P230568 CPL, two separate submissions which are identical in physical characteristics, but had resulted in two totally different recommendations. P230451 CPL and P230587 FUL, two entirely separate submissions which are identical in physical characteristics, but again resulted in two totally different recommendations. P230559 CPL and P230591 FUL, two submissions again identical in physical characteristics, but once more resulted in different recommendations from our officers. Why? Three of these applications originally appeared on the councillor lists, the list where we as councillors can call in any application for which we may have our own personal concerns or may be acting on behalf of a resident or constituent. On the list, they were recommended for one decision or another. I called them in. Disturbingly, those three applications were subsequently resubmitted with no material change whatsoever. That's extremely disturbing. Of 8 applications I'd originally called in, 4 were subsequently withdrawn. Why? How can that happen? If I could move to two other examples of recently submitted applications, were both P230395 full and P230453 full, should have been handled under permitted development rights, but instead forced both applicants to submit full planning permission approvals for very minor works. How minor were the works? One of them was for a hut, a garden shed, a full planning application for a hut. How ridiculous is that? I'm now going to comment on another couple of applications which have caused me great concern and how the application of house or permitted development rights can be abused or taken advantage of. P190395 FUL and P230346 CPL. Two applications for the same site, one a full application which is apparently headed for refusal and therefore withdrawn, and a revised submission for a certificate of lawful use which was subsequently approved. The use of the CPL route avoided the more onerous requirements of a full planning application. I have another example of what amounts to unauthorised development, which we, the council, appear to be hamstrung by legislation to prevent us applying our statutory role as the certifying authority to ensure compliance with legislation. It concerns a case of extensive development to a property without required permissions. It's been confirmed that the very large extension is unauthorised, i.e. there are no planning permissions in place. It would appear that the council can only request that the developer submit either a planning application or an application for a certificate of lawful use. If the developer decides not to submit an application, the very extensive unauthorised extension then remains, unaltered, unchecked, untouched by legislation or the council. That cannot be right. Permitted development rights are welcome in principle. Unfortunately, their application and regulation are flawed, fatally. As a minimum, I would request that the executive of the council withdraw the application of a fee for an initial consultation with a planning official by an applicant, currently sitting at between £60 to £180, to allow the guidance to be given to what, in the majority of cases, are unqualified and unknowledgeable members of the public. We should be assisting the public here. It would go some way in preventing the number of applications which are currently withdrawn at a very late stage. I've illustrated here 50% of the applications which I had called in were withdrawn only following their appearance on the councillors' list. That's unacceptable. We are here to serve our residents and constituents, not punish them financially and cause them extensive delays to their projects. In line with the aims of the motion, I would also request that the council should give great consideration into the setting up of a planning scrutiny committee. The issues and concerns highlighted here in this presentation are grave and are multiple. Development regulation matters are one of the most important functions within the remit of any local authority. We have to give it our greatest respect. Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to take any questions from any officers or councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCabe. I'm going to defer to Mr. Moody because I think you've highlighted a number of and named a number of applications, a number of examples, and unless you are a member of the planning committee, you may not be aware of those, and therefore the context is not something that I don't think is evidence that's able to be taken from this particular executive. Colin, have you got any comment or guidance on that?
If I could just respond, Councillor Michael John, I accept that. I accept what you're saying there. The only reason that I'd quoted them there was to illustrate the number of them. You know, that there were the 8 that I'd called in. I fully accept what you're saying regarding, you know, some members not being on the council on the planning committee. Thanks.
But each planning application is taken on its own merits and it doesn't necessarily correspond to previous applications. Colin, have you got any guidance on that?
I think the only thing I would add to that is that I think maybe one or more of the applications that have been referred to is on the agenda for the planning committee tomorrow. So I would just caution at the point where we're about to move into, which is debate, any members of the planning committee commenting on any individual application that may have been referred to by Councillor McCabe. But I think the next stage in the procedure, now that the executive has heard from Councillor McCabe, is to see if there's a member to formally move the motion.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Spears?
Thank you. I will formally move the motion. Permitted development procedures. The planning legislation allows significant scope to use permitted development rights regarding planning matters. This is concerning. The use and the extent of permitted development rights has led to a level of ambiguity in certain planning decisions, which should be of concern to all councillors, whether serving on the planning committee or not. Council is asked to refer this issue to the scrutiny committee to consider. Councillors must have confidence in the planning process. I so propose.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Spears. Do I have a seconder?
Convener, I'm going to second the motion. And I think partly I am seconding the motion because I think that, as you've alluded to yourself, not everybody in the executive committee has the great pleasure and blessing to have been availed of many years on the planning committee. I seem to have ended up back there for my sins. And I think that there are probably more issues with the planning committee that I don't think we could talk till our sun goes into a white dwarf and we still wouldn't be able to even accurately express them. So I think what Councillor McCabe has expressed is a number of concerns of the planning committee. I'm not sure what in terms of referring this particular issue to scrutiny, I'm not entirely sure what scrutiny would be able to do in terms of the issues around permitted development, but I do think that there are a number of issues within how planning law can be, well, there's a lot of national issues of planning law, but even how it's interpreted, but probably more crucially how it's understood by councillors in a wider sense. And I think that on this occasion, as I often feel with many motions, I understand why it's referred to the executive, but actually I think it's of a benefit to have a wider demographic experience and understanding by hearing these things at full council, because it would enable those with a greater experience to actually be able to contribute to the debate and understand what the standing orders say. But I do know we have another opportunity to have a look at the detail in standing orders, and perhaps in some occasions for some motions that is better that these things are discussed where more people can input meaningfully. So that's why I'm seconding it. As I say, I'm not sure in terms of on the permitted development rights that the scrutiny committee will be particularly able to bring forward recommendations on that. But I do think there are a number of other issues. And I note that from our planning training, sometimes general themes are identified about things which could be looked at in terms of scrutiny for planning. And we were discussing, without breaking any kind of confidential discussions, but we're discussing potential things like that last week during our planning training. So I do wonder if there's an opportunity to slightly, not so much amend the motion, but to broaden it and to say, well, you know, I think that perhaps at an appropriate time, the scrutiny committee could look at some aspects where, for myself, I think the call-in procedures in general need some, because that affects all of us, needs some amendment and review and wider understanding. So I do think perhaps scrutiny could pick up some issues that are to do with how this council understands, looks at planning law, and that our councillors then therefore understand and interpret that. So I'm happy to second the motion and hear others' contributions. Thank you, Convener.
Yeah, well, the motion we have before us is specifically around the permitted development. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. This is to Mr. Moody, I'll call you Councillor Moody there, sorry, Colin. As Mr. McCabe has now listed off a number of applications, including one which tomorrow I intend to put in a declaration of interest, because I've actually been helping the constituent who is not that happy at the delay, obviously, at the moment that she's got on getting her hut put in. Do I have to declare a declaration of interest now because Councillor McCabe has brought that one up specifically?
I think my initial view on that, Councillor Bowes, would be no. I think Councillor McCabe has made very clear that he was using these as examples to support a particular proposition within his motion. We're not, and indeed I think shouldn't be, debating the individual applications themselves. I think those were illustrations only.
Okay, thank you for
that. Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's a point of clarification either for Colin or perhaps for Councillor McCabe or Spears. Obviously, looking at the contents of the motion, it seems to be on permitted development rights. However, within the speech, there was a suggestion of a planning scrutiny committee or a change to the fee structure. Can I just clarify whether that would be covered within the scope of the report, because it seems to be outside the scope of what's actually being asked for within the motion?
Colin?
As I understand the motion, convener, it raises a general concern with the operation of permitted development procedures. And the ask of this committee is to refer it to the scrutiny committee to have a broader and deeper look at that issue. I think Councillor McCabe has referred to a planning scrutiny committee. I think it's more in the scrutiny committee itself looking at the planning issue. And there is the option for the scrutiny committee, if it felt there was an issue that required further in-depth consideration, to refer that matter as one within a future scrutiny plan. So that would be another outcome, which would be a scrutiny panel on the particular issue. So I think that's maybe where the motion is directed, if the scrutiny committee thought there was an issue that required further consideration.
Thanks, Colin.
Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, convener. I think it would have been appropriate if we could have had either Mr. Henderson or Mr. Dryden here for some guidance, because you've already mentioned, convener, that there is people in this meeting who know nothing about planning, and there's people here that's been on the planning committee that their interpretation is completely different from somebody else's, and that's, I say that all the time at the planning meeting. When people talk about a policy, it can be interpreted as many ways as you want it to, because it's no set doing as that's the law. It's people's interpretation of the policy. I don't know if the scrutiny way is the right way to go with this. I understand Brian's concerns, but I don't know if the scrutiny panel way is the right way, because there will be people on that scrutiny that's also on the planning. So I'm unsure at the moment. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thank you. I may come up with a suggestion that may be taken forward by way of an amendment, but I'll hear what others have to say first. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, convener. I heard what Colin said there, but I'd like a bit of clarification around what Councillor McCabe said, because he did allude to a separate planning committee from what I took from it. So could we get some clarification as to what he's actually wanting from this motion?
Councillor McCabe.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I'm happy to answer each of the points that's been brought up, and to be perfectly honest, I don't disagree with any of them. Councillor Garner's last point was, maybe a separate policy, planning scrutiny. Yeah, potentially that could have been the suggestion. It was how I'd phrased the terminology to even suggest not the scrutiny committee, but a planning scrutiny committee. You'll remember that I attempted to bring this to full council. This falls into what Councillor Murtagh, thanks for seconding the motion. This falls into what Councillor Murtagh alluded to. This is a bigger thing than just within the planning committee and within the members of the planning committee. I feel it applies to all councillors. Some councillors will never serve on the planning committee, but they will be involved in planning. They'll be approached by constituents to say, I've got a planning application, or I wish to oppose a planning application, and they have no knowledge of how to engage in the planning process. That's a problem. That's an issue. The point that Colin, Mr. Moody made regarding me specifying specific planning applications, I don't want anybody here, particularly as he mentioned members of the planning committee, making any comment on any planning application, which potentially is coming up tomorrow at the planning meeting. That's not my intention. There are problems here with permitted development rights. It's a major concern to me, because, as I said, within it, there's an erosion of development control and a muddying of the whole processes, rules, regulations, interpretations and application. For example, do you know that permitted development rights, a certificate of a lawful use, is not actually it's not a planning application as such, and therefore cannot be moderated or whatever. It's just an application. It comes in front of the planning committee, but it's not a planning application per se for permission. It's a technical interpretation, which I find an absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And that leads to the erosion, as I say, of what planning is about. Planning is about development control to ensure that we make sure that we don't have any nuisance neighbour issues or improper development happening in our communities. An example that I've given is of something which has been admitted by planning is unauthorised, and yet we can't do anything about that. All we can do is say to the people, that's unauthorised. You should either submit a planning application or a certificate of lawful use. If they decide not to engage, end of story. That unauthorised development sits there. You must agree that that is a problem. Surely there's something that we can do about this. So again, to kind of come back to a number of points that councillors have made, it's a wider issue, if you like. Permitted development rights is a major concern of that, but it's a bigger thing, and I think we really need to look at you know, in the round with using all councillors, the council per se. I'll just go back to a point that Councillor Bowes made, where it was suggested that I may have held up the development of, I don't want to get too involved in it, but the development of it is a hut. It's termed in the planning application as construction of a building. There's no construction involved in it. It's a shed, a garden shed. It should never have, it's a full planning application. Here's where the whole system falls down. It's a full planning application for a gardening shed. That is the very essence of what should be permitted development rights. The applicant could quite easily have put that shed wherever the shed wanted to go, and then applied for permitted development rights. The shed would have been up. She then applies for permitted development rights. Because of the system, our planning officers would have come back and said, no, it's not permitted development rights. You have to go through the full process. The shed would have been there. There's nothing to prevent that shed being erected. She would then go through the processes as happening now. So therefore, there's no real delay per se on that one. But that's just an illustration of how permitted development rights is not being applied where it should be applied, and it's being applied where it shouldn't be applied. We need to get this clarified. We need to get this cleared up. I just feel it's we're not handling permitted development rights specifically, particularly well.
Okay, Councillor MP, I think you've made your point. I'll take a couple of other contributions in, and then I'm going to make a proposal. Councillor Kerr, can I ask people to not refer to individual applications, please? Because I really do fear we are straying into territory that we shouldn't be. But I'll get Councillor Kerr and Councillor Bowes.
It's probably for Mr Moody, the convener. With the new National Planning Framework 4 guidance coming in is permitted development covering it? Because that's a national, that's came from Scottish ministers, and that'll take precedent over local development plan 2 until we go to local development plan 3. So I just wondering if it was.
I'm not aware of that having a major implication on permitted development, because I think the whole point of permitted development is that it's almost like a carve out where because of the nature of the applications, they don't require considered against planning policies, so that they're like an exception to development control. I don't know if Michael wants to come in on that point just to confirm or not, if that's the case.
Yes, thanks, Colin. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is the case. That permitted development rights are separate from the National Planning Framework 4.
So basically, it's an officer's interpretation of what he or she determines what permitted development is.
That's correct, Councillor Cairn. I think the point you made earlier and confirmed by Councillor McCabe, it's a technical interpretation. A technical interpretation by an officer can often lead to inconsistencies because it's an interpretation, and I think that's the real issue. And I suppose I'm struggling a wee bit with what the end result of this motion will give us from Councillor McCabe's point of view, in terms of, are we trying to get to a level playing field where everyone's interpretation is the same? Well, I'm not sure how we can achieve that. So I'm struggling a wee bit with the outcome of this exercise, what we're trying to achieve. And again, I'd appreciate maybe further clarity so we're absolutely crystal clear on what the scrutiny committee is looking at and what we're trying to get out of that process.
As far as I'm concerned, that we have the motion's very specific, it's permitted development. But what the outcome of that, I'm not entirely clear of myself. Therefore, I am going to propose an alternative way forward. That rather than taking this into a scrutiny committee where we do have members who are non-members of the planning committee that may find it difficult understanding all the legal frameworks, that there is a seminar arranged by the service to be able to talk to everybody, all members, around what permitted development is, what it's designed to do, and that it is a legal obligation within the planning framework. We don't have the ability to change the terms of that permitted development, and it is open to interpretation, and there will be variations of that. And I think that would allow all members to actually have an understanding and be able to represent in an appropriate way, because at the moment I don't see that that's necessarily happening. My fear is that we will have planning committee agendas that are bogged down around permitted development aspects, and we are then not meeting our timescales and obligations around in much larger strategic planning processes that we really should be getting on with as elected members, rather than getting down to what's been talked about today as a garden shed. And that we're spending a lot of time talking about that when we really should be talking about the big strategic nature of things. Councillor McCabe, you're not actually a member of the committee on this. Therefore, can I ask you to maybe any comments to come through one of the other members? Councillor Murtagh, you've already spoken, so it has to be a question.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's a question, as you yourself also have already spoken and put in to sort of try and move the business along. It's a question about where we then go in terms of, I mean, what Councillor McCabe, I think, regardless of some of the examples have been used, is trying to demonstrate transparency and the planning process being an important thing. And I think that's important whether it's permitted development or any other issue. In terms of where we might go with this, I suppose I've also suggested a briefing on not just this topic but on others for all members to Mr. Dryden yesterday, given our training last week. But could we amend slightly, perhaps, given that there may be, I mean, the scrutiny committee is the body that can decide on whether there's a panel, or they might decide to refer something to executive, or they might decide that perhaps a PDP might be something that they could suggest to executive to then look at. I don't know whether it might be that it could be the motion could be slightly amended to say that council is asked to refer this issue to the scrutiny committee as part of a review of the wider planning process, because there were some issues which other members felt potentially could be looked at as part of the wider planning process. And that doesn't put a date on it, but it doesn't kick it out either as an issue. And I don't know whether Councillor McCabe isn't part of this committee, so I can't likely ask him either to give me his comments to come through me, but I'd be happy with that if he was happy with that and Councillor Spears was happy with that.
I'm going to refer to Councillor Moody on this. Would that be a significant change to the amendment, to the motion, therefore changing it fundamentally?
I think the answer to that is probably no. I think it reflects the kind of change that is made to motions during the course of debate, but it needs to be, the motion is now moved by Councillor Spears, so it would need to be Councillor Spears' hand to suggest this, and only with the agreement of the seconder.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. I'm just wondering if it'd be worthwhile doing both. Can we refer this to scrutiny and let them look into it, and also have a seminar as well for all members? It would make a lot more sense, I think.
I'm going to go to Mr. McGuinness to get his view on this and the implications of it.
Yeah, I'm certainly content with running a seminar to help members better understand some of the technical aspects of consideration by officers, and I think to hopefully help explain why certain applications may have gone through a certain route or determined as being permitted development. So I think a seminar would be something I'm absolutely content with offering to members. In terms of going to scrutiny to consider, that's very much for the executive to determine. I've no aversion to that either. I suppose for me it's just about the terms of reference for scrutiny. What is it we're actually asking them? And that's the area I'm still still unclear on, frankly.
Great. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not sure what the outcome would be if this went to scrutiny either, but that is presumably part of the whole process. I'm not on the planning committee and I'm not on the scrutiny committee, so I have been finding the discussion very interesting. What I am slightly uncomfortable about is a situation where people who are on the planning committee and are on the scrutiny committee and are saying this would be a good idea, if we then say no, we would not want to put it to the scrutiny committee, I would be uncomfortable with that. The scrutiny, those who are on both presumably have ideas about the way in which they would look into the issue. Absolutely agree that there is a need for further training. I have been conscious of that for some time, particularly for those of us who are not on the planning committee, because as Councillor McCabe has said, we do get involved in planning issues. But I do think I'm inclined to say that I can't see that anything bad is going to come out of a referral to scrutiny committee. But certainly more than happy to engage in further training.
Okay.
Convener, can I ask that I just be allowed to speak to a point? It was brought by Mr. McGuinness.
Councillor McCabe, I'm sorry, Councillor McCabe, you're not a member of the committee, therefore you don't have the same rights as a member and coming back and forward.
That, Convener, I appreciate
but you've
that. Mr. McGuinness did ask that. I posed a question. I'm trying to answer the question to satisfy Mr. McGuinness.
Can you do that through one of the other members on the committee? Then perhaps you can share that with others. But
do you want me to speak to Councillor Spears? do you want me to speak to Councillor Spears online here to get him to ask the question or to give the answer to Mr McGuinness? It's a very simple illustration, convener. I'm not trying to be awkward. I'm trying to satisfy a question made by Mr
Councillor
McGuinness.
McCabe, I'm trying to abide by the terms of the committee. You're not a member. You've had the opportunity to respond to questions. So
and a subsequent question from Mr McGuinness has come up, and I'm prepared to give him the answer. You're not prepared to allow me to give him the answer. That's fine. Thank you.
I've given you the route in which you can do that. Councillor Spears now has his hand up, and I'm happy to take a question from him, because people have already spoken. Councillor Spears.
I can't determine a question that's not been given yet on behalf of my deputy leader of the non-aligned independents. But I would say it's maybe time we went to summing up. And if you want me to go ahead, I'll sum up on behalf of the motion. What we have here is a request.
Could you, Councillor Spears, could you just hold on a second? I've got Mr Moody wanting to come in to provide some guidance.
Convener, I think it was just before we go to any issue of summing up, which will close the debate. I think we just need a seconder to your amendment suggesting the seminar.
Happy to second, Sue.
Thank you.
Convener, can I just clarify on your amendment? Is that before summing up starts? Are you saying that you're, instead of council is asked to refer this issue to scrutiny, you're saying council is asked to refer this issue to prepare a briefing, or is it, as Councillor Nimmo was suggesting, that we do both? Just want to clarify what your position was.
The suggestion was that there'd be an all-member seminar to look at permitted development, which is the terms of the motion that's before us, that would allow members to have a better understanding, because there's not the clarity with regard to what the scrutiny committee would be asked to be doing. At that point, following that, if there was still the desire for something to go to scrutiny, perhaps something that would be much clearer about what the intended outcomes could be brought forward. Councillor Nimmo.
Well, that's exactly what I was wanting to clarify as well, convener. Obviously, I made the suggestion of taking on board both the options of it going to scrutiny and having the added seminar for members. If your amendment fails, and if it is referred to scrutiny, do we still have the option to have an all-member seminar?
Well, that would be determined on the mover of the motion.
I think, convener, if I could assist there, you're putting forward the option of a seminar. If it fails, then the executive is determined not to have a seminar. It's determined instead to go straight to the scrutiny committee.
Councillor Martin.
Convener, can I just say, I think regardless of what this executive decides on whether there should be a seminar on X, Y or Z, I think it's normal practice that if any councillor asks an officer whether they can have a seminar for all members on something, we don't need to go through committee. And as I said, I already asked yesterday whether we could have an all-member seminar on a number of issues of planning for all members, and having already made that request, I wouldn't expect it to be overridden by something that happened in the executive committee. Is that not the case, Mr Moody?
I think that would be a separate issue of how that request was dealt with. I suppose my observation was there's two propositions in front of this committee, and there wouldn't be a seminar taking place as a result of the decision if the decision was to choose the scrutiny route rather than the seminar route. But yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Hannah.
Can I then put forward another amendment, which is that we have both a referral to scrutiny and a seminar, because I don't think it should be an either or. I think that there's a great deal to be said in favour of both. I thought Councillor Nimmo might be going to actually put it forward as an amendment, but since he hasn't, I will put it forward as a formal amendment.
Just to say, the mover of the motion could have accepted the seminar and hasn't, and that would have resolved the problem, but that hasn't been the case.
But your amendment suggests we have one or the other. My amendment is suggesting we have both.
Convener, could I just ask, if Councillor McCabe
Councillor Murtagh, I'm going to go to Councillor Mr. Moody. Mr. Moody.
So as I understand it, maybe just to summarise the position, Convener, we have the motion moved and seconded. We have your amendment moved and seconded, which is instead of the referral to the Scrutiny Committee, we have a seminar for all members. Councillor Hannah, I think, is giving notice of a further amendment. As the standing orders currently are, we would need to take the vote on the first amendment, and then the second amendment would be considered.
Colin, I'm happy to second Councillor Hannah.
Convener, on a point of order and clarity. I, as the seconder, if Councillor McCabe would either nod his head or shake his head, would be happy to accept Councillor Hannah's suggested amendment to make it the substantive motion if the mover of the motion, being Councillor Spears, would also be happy with that.
Convener, the actual mover of the motion's hand's been up for some time, Councillor Spears.
Councillor Spears wished to sum up, and that was why we had to intervene at that point. But again, Councillor Spears hasn't got his camera on, so it's difficult to know where he is at this moment in time.
At my end, the difficulty is obviously at your end. I can clearly see my picture, my face on the screen at the moment.
Convener, I can't see Councillor McCabe, Councillor Spears.
No.
All I've got is the RS.
However, Councillor Spears, would you be prepared as a mover of the motion to accept the additional seminar?
I would like to sum up on our motion and make an inclusion, if you allow me to speak.
Well, Councillor Spears, I think in order for people to be able to vote, we need to know whether or not you're happy to accept it or not. And then you can go to move to the summing up.
Well, can I speak now? Would that be okay?
Are you happy to accept the inclusion of the seminar?
I may include that in my summing up, if you allow me to speak.
Well, I think people need to know what they're voting for in order to withdraw any other motions.
I think I'll go ahead with summing up.
It would be helpful to know whether you're happy to accept. The seconder is happy to accept. The writer of the motion. It would be very much easier for you to say yes, you're happy to accept the inclusion of the seminar, and that way people will know what we're voting for.
Speak, then I might just say that, but allow me to speak. Would that be okay?
Go ahead, Councillor Spears, but it's normal practice that people would either say yes or no, and then they could move forward. And as I say, you could ask, could you put your camera on?
My camera is on. My camera is on, and I can clearly see my face at my end of this screen. As I've stated already, the difficulty appears to be at your end, of which I have no control.
Just to say, others can't see your visually, but could you please continue? Continue, yes, please.
My camera is quite clearly showing on. I can see my picture on screen, but I can't determine what happens at your end.
Councillor Spears, I've asked you if you wish to speak to continue and with your summing up.
That would be fine. That's what I'm trying, the point I'm trying to get to. What we have here is a difficulty on the determination of interpretation and ambiguity. And it's quite clearly stated here in our motion that it's led to a level of ambiguity. The definition that came from the officers is because of interpretation. I will be willing to accept the amendment by Councillor Hannah with regard to this, because the object of this motion is to clear up all ambiguity. And if ambiguity comes down to different interpretations on the same issue, then we clearly as elected members need to make that make it obvious that we're looking into that matter. So I would go mainly with Councillor Nimmo's suggestion that it goes to scrutiny and we have a seminar regarding this. So the elected members who're democratically elected, and we all stand at the same election, as you'll remember, should be crystal clear on behalf of their constituents the determination between interpretation and ambiguity. And I think that's what this motion is trying to push forward. So yes, I will go along with Councillor Hannah's further amendment, because I was going to speak in my summing up that I do agree with Councillor Nimmo that we need further information regarding this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colin, I know this is out of procedure, but again, because Councillor Spears wouldn't agree to the change to the amendment, I'm happy to withdraw the amendment, providing that my seconder's content with that as well. But again, apologies that that is now out of sync with our procedures, but I wasn't given that opportunity. Councillor Garner, would you, or Councillor Bice, would you be content with that?
I'm content with that.
Thank you, Convener. And maybe just to summarise then, is that the mover of the motion, with the agreement of the seconder, has agreed to incorporate the suggestion that an all-member seminar be arranged, and on that basis you've withdrawn, with the agreement of your seconder, your amendment. There's accordingly no need for a vote.
Thank you. Everybody therefore agreed?
Agreed.
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 Okay, we will move on to second motion, which is update on Flex, and the mover of this motion is Councillor Spears.
Thank you. The uptake of Flex. We currently have no uptake of Flex in the Falkirk area. As known as local authority eligibility flexibility, this scheme helps homeowners or private tenants with the installation of home energy efficiency measures. The scheme will help improve the least energy efficient homes in the local authority area, so helping meet the government's fuel poverty and net zero commitments. The flexible approach for local authorities, open bracket, LAs, close bracket, in identifying fuel poor and vulnerable households who may benefit from heating and energy saving measures. It refers as Eco4 Flex. Officers are asked to report back to a future meeting on what grant funding may be available to council residents and on proposals to publicise these where they exist. I would go further and say, to achieve net zero, we need to incorporate all homes, all people in our district, not just certain sections of the community, but everybody. And I think you'll agree that everybody's going through particularly financially difficult times, and with the increased energy costs, then whether you're liable for any form of benefit or you're not, you're suffering at the moment. And we who are elected to represent the whole community should be looking at try and take this up, at least look into this matter so we can help 100% of our community and not just some. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Kerr?
Quite happy to second the motion, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'll go to Councillor Deacon.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. This is a motion that's actually quite a good one. DECO 4 is a new illustration of the fourth phase of the energy company obligation and is managed by Ofgem, and since 2013 has seen over 3.1 million home improvements, with the eco scheme being in place until 2026. The primary goal of the scheme of the grant is to support the low-income households, as been said, and for people who are unable to upgrade their home and heating systems. I would suggest private residents who are interested in finding out more, having a look at the Ofgem website, because there's a lot of useful information about Eco 4. As Councillor Spears has said, Eco 4 Flex is a local authority involvement, something that the Council at this stage is not signed up to do. Now, I do have strong reservations in relation to the scheme, in particular related to the resources that may be necessary for Council to assess suppliers and progress installations with private homeowners. In this current financial climate, supporting and promoting the scheme more widely would be welcoming. Entering into a flex arrangement may introduce an unaffordable burden on the Council. As climate change is something we all need to work on, I have asked the climate change team to look at including the Eco 4 scheme into not only the Council website, but also the Decarbonised Falkirk website, so residents can have access to information about the scheme when they search on our sites. This is something I know that the team are happy working on at the moment, as we continue to support our communities as we transition from fossil fuels. So I support this. I do support our report being looked into by Council and into Eco 4 and Eco 4 Flex. And I have nothing else to say.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Deacon. Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, convener. I think it's important that we do what we can. I accept the issue about resources, but it seems to me that there is a role in this for our advice staff and other advice agencies that we support in terms of ensuring that people are aware of what is available. And I'm quite clear that there's a case for looking at what is available in terms of information on our website. So I think this is a motion to be supported and encouraged, but I wondered if Karen might have something to say about the potential for the advice sector to be engaged on it as well.
Mrs. Algie.
Yes, thank you, convener. Convener, I think as Councillor Deacon has said, this is one for private households. So at the moment we have been supporting our housing tenants to actually look at their energy rather than our private households. So this is slightly different in that respect. And we do give out a lot of advice on how tenants can seek advice, support, extra financial support for their homes. But if members are to agree this, happy to look at how we incorporate this into any advice that's given, because I'm sure that would be part of the comms arrangements.
Thank you. Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, just to echo the comments of Councillor Hannah, I'm happy for a report to come back on this one to explore how we can further help, and I also thank officers for the opportunity for a briefing previously, and I'm glad that the suggestion I put forward of putting something on the website is being adopted. It's good to see that going forward, because that will be helpful with referrals. I think the question's just from Mr McGuinness in terms of the question put forward quite correctly by Councillor Hannah is that the welfare team could potentially adopt this. We've got an answer on this. What bespoke resources do you foresee us requiring if within the terms of the report coming forward? Not asking for the full report at the moment, just a sort of indicative understanding of what resource implications may be flagged up in that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. My understanding is it would require a staff resource, particular identified, and how we might actually be able to finance that.
Yeah, that's correct, convener. Certainly looking at some of the contractors and suppliers who would provide the services to our private sector citizens, we would have to assess them, determine they're suitable through Trusted Trader Scheme. We would have to work with the resident to ensure that the installation was correct and to their satisfaction. We need to ensure through our trading standards colleagues that we are addressing any potential rogue traders in this regard and supporting our citizens to get the best solution for their premises. So yes, indeed, there would be a requirement for staff resources, and that would certainly form part of the paper should that be agreed today to move forward. We'll bring forward a paper outlining what resources we believe would be necessary to take on the Eco4 Flex arrangement.
Thanks, Michael. And just a supplementary question off the back of that, is that currently responsibilities taken on by Ofgem and the national operator of the scheme?
I don't know the details of what Ofgem are doing. They're certainly the main operator of providing the grant. I don't know what assessment they make of contractors. I'm not aware of what assessment they carry out with various contractors in the marketplace just now.
But that's currently their responsibility.
The responsibility is to provide the grant to allow customers to insulate their homes, etc.
Right, thank you. Thank you, convener.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, convener. I support the terms of the motion. I'm just wondering, though, this is a national project. What funding has the Scottish Government made available to help councils out here? Because I don't think it's fair that the councils have to carry the financial burden.
Michael, I don't know if you're in position to give that detail.
Yeah, there are a range of different providers, Home Energy Scotland, a number of other organisations that have various different grants that are certainly eligibility criteria required to access those grants. But there are a number of different grants available that we will continue to promote through our social media, etc., to our communities. But there are a number of grants available out there.
Okay, Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, convener. I support this motion. I think it's very important that people in private households have the same access to information about improving the energy efficiency in their homes. It's very important because it is what's going to help reduce carbon emissions in Scope 3, which is the 2045 target, and that's going to be the far more difficult target to reach in comparison to the Scope 1 and Scope 2 target. But it's accessing the information. Unless you're fully aware of the need to decarbonise and the benefits of decarbonising for the planet, you're not going to access these websites. So we need to put the information in a way that people are actually going to respond to. And I think that is the financial benefits of improving energy efficiency. How much are you going to save in your energy bills? And I think if that can be incorporated in the paper that's taken forward, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murtagh.
Yeah, I would agree with the previous statements, and just to pick up on what Councillor Bundy was saying, and I think Home Energy Scotland do a fantastic job and would direct people to go there for information should they be looking into that. But quite correctly, as Councillor Bundy said, if they're not thinking about that, then they're not going to access those resources. And I think one of the issues in particular about this whole area for homeowners and for private tenants is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think we've all been subject to when the phone goes and somebody says, oh, do you know there's a grant available in your area for such and such, and it's very, the first thing you do is say no thank you and put the phone down, because it's very difficult to know which schemes to trust and where that information is coming from. And the benefit of official sources like Home Energy Scotland and like the government resources and like the council is that these are trusted portals of information where we can provide quality, trusted sources. Whether it's even just directing and signposting, they are able to cut through that scepticism, because there is an awful lot of scamming and mistrust out there. So I support the terms of the motion. I think that obviously anything which has resource implications does have to be looked at what's most appropriate. But I would say that I'll give that plug for Home Energy Scotland to direct people that there are ways, whether that's solar panels and battery systems and whatever's most appropriate for your household, whether that's just topping up your insulation. There's lots of things you can do, and it will help you. But I understand that a lot of people will be very reticent to go down that process in the first place, but people are there to support you, and I found them personally in our house extraordinarily helpful at reducing bills. So I would point people to go there in the first instance rather than wait any longer. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. There is the ability within the report to maybe start to look at where a pooled resource may come to be able to provide that staff resource to manage the grants and be able to do that promotion. But that would be subject, obviously, to coming forward as to part of the budget proposals as well, going forward. But there would be an opportunity with the report to be able to shape what that might look like, and so how that might be able to be taken forward. And I think it's a positive way that we can do that and be able to assist owner occupiers and private tenants at a time when there often doesn't appear to be much by way of support for them. And they are obviously subject to the cost of living increases that we all are, particularly around energy costs. There are no other hands up and there are no amendments, so can I ask if people are in agreement?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our agenda, item 6, and it's the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme. And I think it's Mr. Kettrick that is going to take this report.
Thank you, Convener. The purpose of the report is to update members on progress of the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, including preparation for notification of the scheme in accordance with legislation. The key recommendations outlined in the report are to note the progress to date, the current status of the project, seek authorisation to commence notification of the proposed scheme in spring 2024, and this is defined in the report as option 1. Agree that a report on the scheme notification will be presented to the executive at an appropriate time for consideration and decision, and agree that once the scheme is confirmed, a further report and outline business case will come to executive seeking authority to commence the detailed design stage should that be considered appropriate. The report also provides an update on the key issues facing the project in the short to medium term and highlights the future potential decisions that may be required. I won't go through the full detail of the report, and apologies for the extent of it. A paper was presented, members will recollect, to Executive on the 28th of November 23, providing an update. And at that meeting, Executive noted that the scheme was progressing towards scheme notification, and officers were asked to bring forward a report seeking authorisation to notify the scheme, and this paper satisfies that requirement. Members will be well aware of the background and the importance of this nationally significant scheme, and further information on this is highlighted in Appendix A. The scheme has 9 stages of development, and these are outlined in Appendix B. To date, the project has concluded stages 1 to 4, which takes us up to outline design and is now ready to commence the stage 5 scheme notification stage. Section 4.10 outlines the progress of the current stage and in summary includes an outline business case, outline design and conclusion of the initial technical deliverables. Sections 5.1 to 5.3 outlines the notification stage activities, which include the issuing of statutory notice itself, particularly for those with interest in the land and property for the proposed flood scheme. It also highlights scheme designs, the schedule of scheme operations and the environmental impact assessment report which are required. As we go through the scheme notification process, there will be significant engagement and communications to ensure there is a full understanding of the awareness of the proposals for communities and affected parties. 5.4 to 5.20 considers the financial aspects of the scheme, and importantly it is recognised that despite the overall progress made locally on the technical aspects of the scheme, there continues to be uncertainty on the funding of the actual scheme delivery, and the existing model of 80-20 split, with the Scottish Government picking up 80%, with the remaining 20% contribution being provided locally, is the approach that is all figures are based on. Based on the scale of the project and the projected costs, a tailored funding model is, however, likely to be required, both locally and nationally, and that requires to be developed in partnership with the Scottish Government and is relying on their their involvement. In terms of context or affordability, just to reiterate, which you'll all have heard before, over 20 years, the project costs would estimate between £7.8 million per annum for a £90 million project contribution from locally, up to £11.6 million for a £134 million contribution based on existing loan rates in a term of 20 years. These figures outline the scheme as unaffordable to the council if progressing on the traditional capital approach. The Stage 5 notification process has been estimated to cost from £1 million to potentially £3 million, depending upon the route of the approval and the level of objections received, which are outlined in the report at section 5.26, table 5.2, and this would expose the council to capital expenditure of between £200,000 and £600,000. The scheme notification process itself is outlined in the report and includes a period to enable objections and significant community engagement. Following that process, a report would then be presented to elected members for their consideration. Whilst officers are recommend authorisation to progress the scheme notification, other options have been considered, and these include modifications to the scheme prior to notification and freezing the scheme progress. The advantages and disadvantages of these are included in sections 5.35 to 5.45. As requested by Executive November, an awareness raising campaign has been implemented, and this has and will continue to include engagement with UK, Scottish Government, national cross-party organisations such as COSLA, private organisations including business and industry bodies who have a presence at Grangemouth, public sector organisations including SEPA, and community representatives such as the community councils. In the recent few days, and therefore we have been unable to include within the report, further correspondence has been received from the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Net Zero and Just Transition, which reiterates the Scottish Government's commitment to the scheme, recognises the scale and complexity of the scheme and the substantial work undertaken by the Council and its officers to develop the project. The correspondence outlines a couple of queries in relation to the scope and technical aspects of the scheme following the Council's response to the Mott MacDonald project appraisal, which members will recollect was undertaken over the summer of 2023 and responded to formally by the Council in September 2023. These will be responded to, but in addition, the correspondence outlines the intention to establish a task force with the Council and other relevant parties to progress the scheme. This is a significant step forward in engagement with the Scottish Government. So apologies for the length of the report and the detailed summary I've presented, but I did feel it was appropriate given the significant stage of the scheme is important. So in summary and in conclusion, the report outlines the progress in relation to where we are on the project, provides an update as requested, seeks agreement to progress the project through the notification process, and recognises the progress that is being made with the Scottish Government, but continues to identify that the funding model is critical if the project is to progress before beyond notification stage. A further report will be supplied to the Executive following the scheme notification for consideration of the next stages, recognising that at that point a funding model will require to be in place or substantially mature at that time. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. And apologies for the background noise.
Thank you for that, Paul, and I do appreciate it. It was very much a romp through the report, but I'll go to Councillor Deacon.
Yeah, thank you very much. So first I want to say thank you to Paul and his team and Alistair. I also wish to hope Alistair has a speedy recovery, as I believe he got injured last week, so he has been off. So I wish to hope, I want to wish him a speedy recovery and get, hopefully we'll see him back soon. Now, as we all know, I don't like to give long speeches, so I'm going to keep this brief. Paul's already outlined a lot of what the report details. We all know the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme. We've been reading the reports for the last few months since I came climate change spokesperson. So it's definitely not something new for us. The report in front of us is an update that I was asked for previously. I would like to take a moment to thank the MSPs who have raised questions to the Scottish Government, especially Michelle Thompson, who asked the Deputy First Minister on the budget for clarity over the funding. As we all know, the response that we got was the Grangemouth Flood Prevention Scheme is exceptional in its scale and cost, and as such requires careful consideration. The Scottish Government will continue to work with Falkirk Council to ensure that the scheme delivers for the local community and economy. I know other MSPs have also received a similar response, so it's good to hear that we have the letter finally, and I look forward to hearing more from the Scottish Government, hopefully more positive information coming forward so we can move forward with this. So I'm going to keep it brief, and I'm just going to formally formally move the recommendations in section 2.1. Yeah, I'll pass it over to the chair.
Thank you, Councillor Deacon. I'm happy to second the report. It's been heartening to hear that the response from Scottish Government and their renewed commitment to the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme and the task force approach to that. And I think that is hugely helpful in allowing us to move to the next stage. And indeed, the agreement to meet with the Minister, which is also something that is going to be really helpful in order to be able to discuss the issues, particularly around the funding, and identify a route forward. So I think it's right that we continue to take this to the scheme notification and continue to work very closely with government officials and others around that task force approach in order to be able to further develop the scheme and start the delivery of it. I will now go to Councillor Spears, who was first. Councillor Spears.
Sorry, I was muted. I don't intend to do a time and tide will wait for no man speech, but I would like to ask some questions of Mr. Kettrick. Can you tell me why repeated requests, especially regarding the Grangeburn and Grangemouth, with dead trees, broken flood defence walls, haven't been answered and haven't been taken on board and nothing has been done? We need to look seriously at the limited flood defences that we have and make sure they're maintained. And can I ask why, now that we're going to hopefully eventually move forward with the Grangemouth Flood Defence Scheme, why we aren't looking after the present infrastructure to a level that we should?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Convener. As Councillor Spears will be aware, as most elected members will be aware, the Council does have a flood team and a maintenance plan in place for its flood defences, and I'll certainly raise those concerns with colleagues to identify where there has been any deficiencies, if that is the case, in relation to the management of the Grangeburn. I think that would sit with the flooding team as opposed to the Grangemouth team specifically, but happy to raise those concerns.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kettrick. Councillor Bundy.
Thank you, Convener. I struggle to accept the notion that the Scottish Government is fully behind this scheme, because we know that this is actually a national importance scheme. It's not one just that the local authority should be taking a lead on, and I know that's what the 2009 Flooding Act states, but I do believe that this is a national important scheme of strategic importance for both the Scottish and UK governments, and that both national governments should be sitting down with Falkirk Council and coming up with a funding plan before we move to the next stage. Because just now we've spent nearly £20 million and there's no results that any taxpayer can see because of it, and I'm scared that we just continue spending tax money and very little results come out of it again. And I think that is the feeling that people are having throughout the Falkirk area as well. But one question that I would like to ask Paul is in response to one of the parliamentary questions submitted by Stephen Kerr, it said that the local authority should have made an economic impact assessment about a potential flood in Grangemouth as part of the submission for funds for a flood protection scheme. So I was just wondering if such an economic impact assessment has been made and if it could be made available to councillors.
Mr. Kirkpatrick?
Convener, yes, I understand there was initial economic impact assessments undertaken when the scheme was being developed, and we would be happy to share that information. Clearly, as we go through the notification process, there will be substantial information that will be made readily available to the public, and would include the economic assessment of the scheme as it is now, and we can certainly share that with councillors.
Thanks, Paul.
In response, Councillor Bundy, to your first point there in the meeting that I attended along with Kenneth and Malcolm, with Mr Lamont MP, we did raise the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme as a national scheme, and he's not come back on that as yet, but it was raised at that meeting.
Yeah, that's good to know, and I'll follow up with John Lamont as well. Thank you.
Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks very much, Convener. Totally agree that we should proceed to the notification stage, and that's option 1 in the papers. It is the largest project in Scotland. It's now been split from the other projects, and it's meant to be the #1 priority. But the last funding model was set up by the Scottish Government over 8 years ago, and we're still no further forward in relation to the funding. There's a lot going on in the last 8 years. We've had COVID and various other things that are going to impact on budgets. Now, the figure that's mentioned in the paper is a project cost in the region of 672 million. Now, the longer this drags on, the higher that figure is going to get. We need to get something done imminently to deal with this. It was interesting to hear what Paul was saying about a task force being set up. That should have been set up a long time ago. It shouldn't have been left until now. We should have been working on that at the moment. I'm just wondering, Paul, do you have any timelines tagged onto this new task force now? When will it be reporting back? Because it's going to drag out the issue of the funding even longer than necessary, in my view. And my other point is in relation to Forth Ports and their part that they play in this project. Why are the dock gates included in this? Why are Forth Ports not dealing with that in their own right? They should be footing the bill for that, in my opinion. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, Mr. Kirkpatrick.
So thanks, Provost. So, Convener. So in terms of the two questions, in terms of the task force, we have literally just in the past couple of days received that communication from the Cabinet Secretary, and we'll be responding and seeking to have that established as quickly as possible. I think there is a recognition that time has been a challenge on getting progress. So we will pick that up in terms of the funding aspect in relation to the contributions from Forth Ports and others who may be affected. The scheme as it's set at the moment, the funding model is on the basis of locally funding. It's not just the council, so that may mean contributions from private sector partners, and again, that would form part of the discussions as part of the funding model debate. But at this stage, there is no funding model proposals, despite the fact we have looked at several different models which do include private sector contributions to the scheme at a local level and a national level, and we'll continue to explore all options with Scottish Government as to see what is possible.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sainbank.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. I understand the recommendation for pursuing notification because it's within the scope of the work that's been completed to date. I think it takes consideration of the fact that the completion of the scheme notification doesn't bind us to any time frame for completing the works. But I do think, as Mr Kettrick indicated, without a different funding model, we'd currently consider this unaffordable. So I'm going to go to 5.38 to 5.42, which is option 2 in there. Is the Scottish Government, as the committed currently 80% funder of any eventual project, given any indication into their opinion of the viability of a modified scheme as outlined 5.38 to 5.42 in the papers?
Convener, the short answer is no. We've had the initial work that's been done by Mark MacDonald. Colleagues have also looked at how you could modify the scheme. Ultimately, the conclusions have been that the full extent of the scheme will be required, and it really then comes down to the phasing and the approach that's adopted. But again, we would be hoping that as the funding model or our funding model options are starting to be mature, that again would be looked at as to how we can get the best deliverability and versus the risk approach.
As I say, Convener, happy to accept the recommendations within the paper. I think that just highlights the impetus that we need to find a better funding model than the one that, as Councillor Nimmo outlined, was written 8 years ago. Thank you.
Don't think any of us disagree with that, Councillor Steenbank, and that's why it's important that we were able to get round the table and have those discussions, particularly with the private sector, about how we can build that funding model that is affordable going forward. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, thank you to Paul for his presentation. Thank you for the report, and thank you to Alistair as well. And I wish him a speedy recovery. I don't actually think there's any apologies needed for the length of the report. This is a significant scheme that we're talking about, and it does require a lot of detail. So no apologies necessary. I do want to just kind of reiterate some of the comments, but also emphasise this is not just a Grangemouth scheme. This is a scheme that will have an impact across the whole of the Falkirk Council area. The flooding, if it was to occur, let us hope it does not, but if it was to occur, would impact across a large area of the Falkirk Council area, and it would impact on the whole of Central Scotland and nationally. Very glad to hear that the Scottish Government has written reaffirming support for the scheme. Once we have put forward the notification, because as I understand it, the notification has to be the next day before we begin to look at the funding models, and I can just have confirmation of that, please. But the notification has to be the next step, and I don't think we want to go on a reduced option. I think we should be notifying on option 1 as is recommended in the report, and I think we must then begin to get round the table and try and ensure that the Scottish Government and possibly UK Government put their money where the mouth is.
So Convener, for traditional scale flooding schemes, the funding model would generally already be agreed prior to you going into the notification process, because that forms part of your deliverability. Because it is an aspect where particularly landowners and that could raise concerns. Do you have a scheme or do you not? Is it going to be delivered? Because we do have the commitment of the Scottish Government re-emphasising they are going to work with us to ensure there is a progress on the funding model. We are comfortable to go through that notification stage, but we have to recognise that coming out of that, we have to be in a position to then have a funding model, or we would pause at that stage, certainly, and that may be something that will need to be considered at a later date. But at this stage, we're really just looking for that consent to go through the notification process, get that design into the public realm, notify the landowners and those with property interests, deal with that aspect of it. That then gives us a scheme which may be approved subject to funding, maybe subject to an inquiry and things like that. But that then gets that part out the way. We can't progress to the next stage though without having greater clarity on the funding model.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Kerr will be the last speaker.
Thank you, Convener. I will be really quick, but I want to pass on my thanks to Mr. Kettrick and Mr. Dawson. I know the amount of hard work that's went into this over the years, especially Alistair, who's worked tirelessly in this, and it's imperative we do move forward to the notification stage as the recommendations state. I was quite surprised that Councillor Bundy thought, I think he says he was opposed to it moving forward to the notification stage. If I caught him right there, I might be incorrect, and I'm not sure if there is an amendment coming forward against these recommendations from his group, but it'd be interesting to hear if that was correct. Actually, I was quite surprised at that, because as I say, it's of national importance to move forward this scheme and get the support of both UK and Scottish governments.
Okay, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. We haven't got an amendment coming forward. There was an amendment coming forward at the last time we spoke about it, but listening to Mr. Kettrick, we decided amendment. We want this to happen, and I didn't take it that, similar to Councillor Bundy, I didn't think this is a Scottish government problem. I feel the UK government must come to the table with this. Grangemouth is between 5 and 10% of Scotland's GDP, and as a national infrastructure, a UK national infrastructure. So I feel that too late not to take it to the next stage, because we've came that forward. If we were doing that, it should have been years ago that we stopped it. But let's no be in any illusion here. The money that it's spoke about, and Councillor Nimmo mentioned it, it's up to 672 million. That's only going to increase, and I feel that that money can't come for just the Scottish government. It needs to come for the UK government as well. And I know, Convener, you said you've spoke previously to Mr. Lamont or Mrs. Lamont, whoever it is. I think we need to be in conversation, and I don't know if Paul is, but they need to be to the party with this, or it's never going to happen.
We can try and have some influence over the makeup of the task force, and then include UK government as part of that task force. Certainly, I can see the conversations we had with Mr. Malone. It is John Lamont MP, was positive in recognising that it was a piece of national infrastructure that we were talking about. But as I say, he's not come back to say what he's doing on that, and Councillor Bundy has offered to follow that. That's absolutely fine. But I think that's the way that we could draw in UK government, is by bringing them in as part of the task force, and we can certainly feed that back into the process. Councillor Bundy, I'm not entirely sure there's much more for you to say in response to Councillor Gardner, but I would make it very, very brief.
Very brief. Thank Paul for just saying that, because the chance to clarify. Opposed to continuous spending for no end product. If there's an end product, I'm happy to follow the recommendations as stated.
Thank you for clarification. Okay, in which case, are we all agreed on the recommendations as per the paper?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, moving on to our final item for this morning, which is the capital programmes update, and I'll go to Mrs. Templeman.
Thank you, Convener. This report is our last projection report on capital for the financial year, and it represents our best estimate of expected spend to the 31st of March 2024. However, members will be aware that delivery of the capital programme can be volatile, and particularly as we enter the winter months, and the severity of the weather can have a significant impact on spend. However, at this point in the financial year, the expected spend is £47 million for the General Fund Capital Programme and £70.7 million spend for the Housing Capital Programme. Both of those figures show slight reductions on the projections reported in October. And for the General Fund, the movements analysed in paragraphs 5.1.2 and 5.1.3, and those are on page 70 of today's agenda. The main area of slippage in the General Fund is the energy efficiency works in schools. My understanding is that this was due to an issue in agreeing contracts with the school providers, but those issues have been resolved and the projects will be moving forward. But colleagues from Place and Education are here and can provide more information if required. The table at paragraph 5.1.10 shows some of the main areas of spend, and we've allocated that spend to the council priorities, and you can see that the bulk of spend is around investment in the economy and the green transition. But the reduced spend in the General Services Capital Fund results in a reduced need to borrow in 23-24, and that's shown at paragraph 5.2.1. But members will be aware that that's really just a timing issue, because as those projects spend in 24-25, the borrowing will be undertaken then instead. And then finally, for the General Fund, paragraph 5.2.3 notes that the Falkirk to Denny cycle path has been removed from the wider 5-year programme, which is shown in the appendix. That project is currently being reviewed. There will be a revised bid that's been made to Sustrans, and the intention will be to reinstate that project into the programme once those revised arrangements have been agreed. Section 5.3 of the main report on page 72 covers the Housing Capital Programme, and again, the main areas of movement are shown in the tables at paragraph 5.3.2. The main area of delayed spend is the new build housing, but areas of underspend across the programme have been offset to an extent by the work on windows and doors replacement acceleration. And once again, the reduced level of spend results in a reduced level of borrowing required in 23-24. The borrowing movements are shown in paragraph 5.6.1 on page 75 of the agenda. And the Treasury Management Strategy highlights that the Treasury team will consider all the options for borrowing. And in recent years, short-term borrowing has been significantly cheaper than longer-term borrowing. That position is starting to change with the volatility in inflation and interest rates. So short-term borrowing is often the same or more expensive than long-term borrowing. But we have to balance that with projections for interest rate reductions so that we're not locking the council into long-term loans at higher rates. But officers in the Treasury team are continuing to work with our Treasury advisors in advance of any borrowing undertaken to try and mitigate the risk where possible. We have highlighted in previous reports that housing is particularly susceptible to those interest rate risks because of the scale of the housing investment programme and the scale of borrowing that supports that programme. So those are the key points in the report that I would draw your attention to. We will, of course, bring an outturn report back to Council, and we'll also bring a Treasury Management outturn report back to Council that will summarise the final position following the year end. I'm happy to answer any questions, and colleagues from services are also available to answer any project specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Templeman, for that. As you've said, this is the final report, and while it's can be difficult reading because of the financial climate, I think the fact that we are looking to achieve without significant slippage in our capital programme is really positive. which means that the project management has been very effective, and be able to deliver on that. I think that's good to see after the historical challenges that we've had with that. That's really positive. But we still continue to have the challenges of high inflation, which hasn't reduced as quickly as we anticipated. In fact, it remains pretty stubbornly high, and therefore is impacting on our ability to borrow, and the breadth and depth of our capital programme will be limited going forward. With the higher cost of borrowing, it doesn't give us the opportunity to do that safely and without actually impacting on what is a very, very pressured revenue budget. But the fact still remains that we are spending significant funds on capital projects that are very relevant and important within our communities. We want to be able to continue to do that. So I thank you for the work that's been going on, and we will be obviously moving to the next iteration of our capital programme as we move into the budget, and there will be obviously some implications on that for the capital programme going forward, just because of the financial climate. But I'm happy to move the update report as it is at this moment in time. Councillor Bouse.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just second you and reserve the right to come back in? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just a couple of questions in relation to this. I'm going to go to 5.1.3, which refers to energy efficiency and carbon reduction slippage. Could I just go into more detail about the scope of the works that were intended to be carried out and when they're anticipated to be pursued in future? Thank you.
Okay, is that maybe Mr. Keswick?
It's myself, Convener, thank you. The scope of the works are the undertaking of LED lighting replacements across secondary schools and the installation of solar photovoltaic panels on the secondary schools. The primary reason for the delay was the contractual arrangements required, specifically in relation to Class of 98, the PPP schools, and the MPDO gateway schools on their facilities. We have resolved the vast majority of those, and the works are obviously can now commence. It's not a good idea to be doing roof works in the winter with the solar PVs, and we have commissioned a programme for the LED replacements, which would involve weekend and evening works to try and catch us up. What I would say is that as we get into the better weather and we move forward into the summer, then clearly we'd be hoping that the vast majority, if not all, of these works will be completed.
Thank you very much. And I think just as a final comment, I think the financial pressures obviously ongoing for local government have been highlighted in the COSLA budget reality document, where there will be further real terms cash cuts to capital funding, which is of extreme disappointment and concern. I think this council should echo the cross-party consensus in COSLA that that's a disappointing situation. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. I've just got a quick question in relation to the housing capital programme at 5.3.1 on page 72. There's a projected underspend of 5.7 million. I'm just wondering if this is likely to be spent before the end of March.
Okay, Amanda.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Nimmo. The forecast spend to the 31st of March 2024 is the 70.680 million, which is on that table. So no, the 5.69 million won't be spent in 23-24. We're not projecting it to be spent in 23-24.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Convener.
Okay. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. In 5.1.10 on page 72 of the papers, setting out the areas under our theme of where the 23-24 expected spend is planned, and just looking at the kind of the green or the investment economy and green transition element in terms of the 3.6 million on flood protection works. I think we've also just debated the progress of the Grangemouth flood protection scheme, which obviously is intended to look at the wider area as well as not just Grangemouth. But one issue which local people regularly get in touch about is about how the council assesses other flooding projects, and I know that there had been some significant concern in terms of even for our officers to be able to grade those projects that need to come forward and how they would get into what might be even the next iteration of our capital programme. And I don't know whether officers can kind of give a bit of an explanation about, we don't see the detail of some of what maybe local people would expect in their local areas of action to address certain planning, certain flooding concerns. How is that being updated and undertaken? Because I think there has been some concern that even in putting forward projects for consideration in the capital funding, that's maybe got some issues. I don't know whether one of the police services colleagues can kind of outline the process for us.
Okay, I think that there's a bidding process that goes into for capital programme funds, but I
just
don't
to clarify,
know whether,
convener, just what I'm saying is that there's an issue in terms of collating that information to be able to put the bidding process to even senior officers so that that can be considered in the capital funding. So it's just to kind of crystallise where we are with that.
Okay, Mr. Binney.
Thank you. I'm happy to get officers to prepare an update to Councillor Murtagh, but I would make the point that the £3.6 million referenced in that report is predominantly the money that's spent on the Grangemouth flood protection scheme, and that the council's actual capital investment in local flood maintenance is significantly less. And it's a point that if elected members are concerned about and do want to see significant improvements, it's something that really needs to come through as part of the budget process when we meet as a council in February, because I think there's a general acceptance that the funding available for flood management is insufficient based on current demand.
Can I come back on that, convener? I think one of the things is I have quite a lot of correspondence privately about this, and so I feel like I do have a reasonable understanding. But we've been here in previous years where we might get to a budget process, whether you're talking about the overall amount or specific projects, where if, say, for example, I wanted to pick up a specific project and say, do you know what, I'd like X amount of millions for something in Airth or Dunmore, I'd need the detail of that from officers to be able to provide costing, to be able to provide where that should be in the hierarchy, as opposed to something up the Braes, for example, or somewhere else. And the problem that I have at the moment as a local elected member, and I presume this extends to everybody else, is that because there is, maybe that's, the general under-resourcing of the departments, etc., or the money that's available, it's not specific about money. I know there's resource issues in terms of available staff within that are trained across the country, but I can't put forward increases in budget or suggested where we should be increasing the budget, because we don't have that sort of suite of projects ranked or detailed or that kind of thing. And I think that's the difficulty that will come when we come to a budget process shortly, that where can elected members go with that. And I think it's really important that we do understand, not just me privately offline, but our public and everybody openly and transparently, how we can input into that process.
Okay, Malcolm.
Thank you. My personal view is that there's two ways that you would take that forward. One is if you have a personal desire to see a localised project move forward, you would ask officers to give an estimate value of the localised project, and then you would ask for that project to be included in future capital spending. Alternatively, you would allocate a significant amount of money to capital investment in flood management in the Falkirk area and leave officers to prioritise that investment based on their professional knowledge of how best to invest money in the local area. Obviously, they would update elected members on that process. With all due respect, I don't think that it's necessary for elected members to fully understand all the scoring matrices behind all the decisions that the flooding team can do. What we all agree on, I think, is that more work needs to be done and more money is needed to be invested. Right now, there's not a great point in officers spending significant amounts of time scoping out projects for which there isn't funding to deliver. So my team are very keen, very up for engaging with all elected members on any projects, and I'm happy to engage personally with any councillor that wants to see particular projects come forward.
Convener, with your permission, I think the difficulty I have is that sets the odds with in some ways what the information I have is. I have a project which is not only scoped and understood, it's been to tender, it's come back with costs, it's there, it's available to be delivered, but we don't have the funding to be able to deliver it. The problem is that we don't have the ability for, if I say, okay, well that project's come back, it's got this much, it's way over the annual budget. The problem I then have as an elected member is that because it's not going forward as against all these other projects across the district where it might be setting second, third, fourth in the hierarchy, of what might be delivered. I can't say, well, do you know what, that's the one that's there, that's been put out to tender, that we've got costs back from, that can go forward, but it might be less important than something that's up the breeze. I don't have that information. I think that is really important that councillors understand how that process works, because otherwise I'd be able to be a bit more insistent about the project which is currently not able to be delivered and been out to tender and have cost back actually getting delivered from a constituency in Dunmore, and I can't be, because it would be unreasonable of me to be so insistent when I don't know the full facts.
Yeah, I think you've made your point, Councillor Murtagh, Councillor Kerr and Councillor Hannah, and then we'll move to the summing up.
Thanks, Convener. A couple of questions on page 72 on 5.1.10. The graphs that's there for the capital spend. With regards to the free school meals expansion, £300,000, is that just for the meals, or is that for extra kitchen? Because when we expand to all children at primary school having school meals, a lot of these schools are going to really, really struggle for space. And it's because when the kitchen area and where they have their lunches, when most of these were built, weren't they built for an excessive amount of people getting school meals? And being out before Christmas to a lot of the primary schools, that was one of the things I asked. And if they could, they would expand, but that all takes money. So I'm just asking, what does that 300,000 cover? Probably you, Karen, would probably be the person to answer.
Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. So that's more about the work we need to do in the schools, to the fabric and the build, to be able to deliver the free school meals. But it's not about the free school meals per se, it's about the delivery of them and how we actually change the fabric within the schools to be able to do that. And in terms of the additional free school meal provision that's still to come forward, we have already done some planning within schools about how that can be accommodated, and information has now been submitted to Scottish Government on the cost of the capital works that would be required to accommodate that. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. My next one's probably for Malcolm, and I mentioned it last week at the FSG meeting. Regard the same page, the same roads, 3.6 million. We have reports this week on national TV that our roads are getting worse, and it's only going to be exacerbated by the freeze that's coming. So what will 3.6 million actually cover.
Okay, Malcolm.
Thank you. So as the scrutiny report on roads highlighted last year, there has been a modest improvement in Falkirk roads in recent years, directly as the result of significant additional investment by the council in its roads. But this is the first year that that investment has dropped back to original levels. So an investment of £3.4 million is approximately £4 million short of what we need to maintain roads at the existing standard. So we are now in a position of what we would call managed decline. If that situation is not addressed, all we can do is manage the decline of our road network. So £4 million in addition to what's there already is needed to get us to a steady state where we can maintain what we've got. And then anything in enhanced of that is where we get to back to being an improvement. And I think you'll have heard me say at the FSG, that's why it's so important for elected members to consider carefully the use of the service concessions, because that funding that's there could be used to improve our assets rather than potentially, make up budget shortfalls over the foreseeable future. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm. On the same graph, all school capital improvements, 1.3 million. I take it that's no taking into consideration the report that Paul's going to bring back for all schools.
Again, yeah, that isn't linked to that. So as we said at FSG, and just for the benefit of other elected members who weren't on the financial strategy group, the Paul and his team are currently undertaking condition surveys of all school property, and it's inevitable that when that comes back, there will be a significant call on capital funding to improve our school estate. And currently the council only allocates in the region of about £1.4 million to annual improvements to the school estate. That will not be sufficient for what we will need to do. So again, elected members need to be considering that when they come forward with their budget considerations in February.
Thanks, Malcolm. And convener, I don't know, these can be taken offline because it's known in the report, but we've spoken previous about the cremators that we used to have, and we were looking to claim back. Can I get somebody to come back to me where we are with that? Because we had a company that subbed the cremators out. They weren't fit for purpose, but to then go buy them. So I just want to see where we are with the money for that. And thanks, convener. You're on mute, convener.
Apologies, not like me. Malcolm, can you take that back and get someone to respond around the cremators? Okay, I did say Councillor Hannah was going to be the last speaker. So I'm going to ask people to be very brief. Councillor Nimmo, I hope it's a question because you've already been in, but I do want to wind this up. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. I just want to say thank you to Amanda and our staff for this report. Like Councillor Murtagh and others who have spoken, clearly this is about the 23-24 capital budget, and some of our interest is in the 24-25 and the way forward. I've been in the council less than 2 years, and in those 2 years I've seen probably 3, probably more reports about the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, for which we don't have enough money. Now, I'm not in any way saying the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme is unimportant, far from it, but The Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme is a 1 in 200. It's a 1 in 200 chance that it might be needed. In my 2 years, there has been flooding at the Polmont Burn, there's been flooding in West Quarter, in my own ward, not to mention in other people's wards. And it does seem to me important that we get some further information forward from Place Services about all the different flood protection schemes and the ways in which we can take those forward. I accept that we may not have the money, but we need to know what the issues are, what the work being done is, and how we can take it forward. So I would simply like to ask Mr. Benny if there's any chance of us getting a wider report on flood protection arrangements across the area that are not the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme.
Okay, Mr. Benny?
Thank you. I'm glad that we're on the same page, because I have asked David Maley to undertake a review of the flooding situation to ascertain what we would do if we had a modest amount of money, what we would have in enhanced, and what we would have if we had, everything that we could possibly wish for. I would just make the point in mitigation. I've only been here 2 years and we've done quite a lot of capital works in terms of Town Hall, Grangemouth flood protection, the TIF scheme, the DEAR scheme. So we've been busy doing a lot, and we're obviously turning our attention to flooding now. So we'll be coming back to you in this year with that update so that you can be better informed. I appreciate that you might well say, well, it would be useful to have that in advance of February's meeting. I don't think that will be possible, but I think what we can agree is that there is a requirement for more increased funding than what we have available, which to my mind at the moment, I could be wrong, Amanda can correct me, is in the region of £250,000, which I think we can all agree is not sufficient given the appetite that elected members appear to have for significant interventions across the Falkirk area.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm.
Thank
you. Councillor Bowes?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Sorry, I wasn't expecting you to come to summing up quick as possible. I did say I reserve the right to come back in. I've listened to all the contributions. People are quite right to ask things about their own area. I've not heard anybody saying yet, well done to the services. That's 117.7 million a capital spend in our local area, in a time where, and we've covered it before, and I've spoken about it before, when construction inflation is running a lot higher than general inflation, and general inflation at this moment in time is still running very high. And over the last 2 years, it's been ridiculous. Interest rates are sitting exceptionally high again, and are looking, and Amanda has warned us all, I don't know how many times already, about the problems with inflation, interest rates, and how that's going to give us problems with capital moving forward, because the longer term, the high interest rates, is more money we're going to have to pay back. Our officers have done an amazing job, I believe, over the last year. To keep so close on their capital spend has been absolutely fantastic. And my favourite one, my pet one, is obviously the Windows and Doors programme. And I know a lot of the other councils cross-party like that programme. They didn't just spend their 15 million, they accelerated it. They actually accelerated it up and spent 20 million in that. It's something it's sometimes easy to have a bit of a dig at officers at times. I think it's also should be sometimes good to actually pick out the good things the Falkirk Council does, and we have done 117.7 million pounds worth of good things in this year. Long may that last. My one worry was that there was only one comment on cuts to capital funding. I was reading yesterday from one of the MSPs that the current budget for the Scottish Government has got a 20% drop in capital spend. So it's not actually surprising then that there's less capital money for everybody, and maybe should they in the future we could probably look at increasing that. But it's not always the Scottish Government's fault. And I think, as somebody once said before, we'll take the money where we can get it. So if we can get it increased for down there and we can get it increased in here, then we can probably spend more than 117. But can I just say, it's been one of the hardest of times. I think our officers have produced an incredible result this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nimmo, your question?
Yeah, but as a question, convener, for Malcolm, if I can. Malcolm, how much would it cost for us to bring our roads up to a normal standard? Do you have a figure available?
Thank you. So from memory, it was around about £7.5 million per year, but it was in the if I could refer you to the scrutiny committee in December, there was a report brought forward by the Roads Department that goes into detail on exactly the situation that's facing the road service at present and how the road service is performing. So that will give you the exact information, but from memory it's an additional £4 million beyond the 3.4 that we have in the existing budget.
Okay, thanks for that, Malcolm. Just on the issue of flooding as well, convener, obviously living in Grangemouth, I've been flooded in the past, so it is a serious issue. It's not just once in every 200 years.
Okay, thank you for that. That brings us to the end of this morning's meeting. Can I just thank everybody for their attendance, and hope you are not snowed in and you're able to have a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.